Rogue Company broke 15 million players just 2 months after release. It was the perfect blend of competitive and casual gaming in a tactical hero shooter that was both cross-platform and cross-progression. And with Dr. Disrespect and 100 Thieves spearheading the game with collaborations, it was looking like Hi Rez was coming out with another banger to follow the success of its previous games Paladins and Smite 2. But unfortunately, it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows for Rogue Company, because if you've never heard of the Hi Rez curse, then you're about to find out exactly why Rogue Company was destined to eventually fail. But to answer that, you have to know what is it that made the game so popular in the first place, because Hi Rez noticed that there was a gap in the market for competitive tactical shooters that were not just for PC players, but for the people playing on console as well. For context, the most popular game in this genre, which is CSGO, abandoned their console version over 10 years ago, and with Valorant only being available on PC, well, Rogue Company was bringing accessibility to the table that the other games just did not have. So if you were little Timmy playing on your Nintendo Switch, then you too could go against your favorite streamer Dr. Disrespect, who had his own skin in the game and even designed his very own map for people to play in. So I'm just here wondering how much of that marketing budget did Hi Rez blow on Dr. Disrespect, and was it even worth it in the end? Because it's important to point out that Rogue Company did have a successful launch, and the hero selection was pretty solid, the gunplay felt really fun to play, but even as the game was technically considered good, the player count struggled pretty harshly after release, and the streamers who were carrying the game ended up going no contact as soon as their contract finished with Rogue Company. A lot of them, including Dr. Disrespect, pretty much dropped the game and just never looked back. So you really gotta ask yourself here, was that the Hi Rez curse working its magic? Well, yes, but also there was a bunch of other factors in play too. Like for example, we can talk about how Rogue Company launched pretty late into the market in October of 2020, in a world where you already had the established great pantheon of multiplayer shooters, like you had Apex Legends, Fortnite, Warzone, Valorant, Overwatch, you know, the top 5 to name a few. So Rogue Company right off the bat was facing a pretty uphill battle when it came to standing out and making a name for itself, and with the ridiculous amount of competition that goes on between game studios inside the hero shooter genre, or just like any shooter genre in general, well, any game that's looking to come out and have any staying power inside the market has to be near perfect for it to even stand a chance in the first place. Meanwhile, I feel like if you were talking about literally any other game genre, like a horror game, a survival game, adventure game, well, in those categories, a lot of the times, I feel like you could just throw out the most dumbest thing imaginable, and it would still somehow find itself going viral. But the bigger issue here that Hi Rez Studios had to deal with was the fact that just 5 months before the release of Rogue Company, Riot Games had already released a cultural phenomenon that just took the world by storm in popularity, and it just so happened to also be a tactical hero shooter just like Rogue Company. I'll let you take a quick guess, but I'm pretty sure we all know which game we're talking about here. Hi Rez had to compete with Valorant, and Valorant completely took over the gaming market when it first launched. I remember that day of release, literally everybody was playing it, everybody was talking about it, and it was kind of like when Overwatch first released, that people were just glued to their monitors playing the game non-stop. And that's not to downplay Rogue Company's success, because like I mentioned, the game did manage to attract 15 million players early in its release, but you know, everyone was just calling it third-person Valorant, so they kept referring to the game as just a copycat, and Valorant was clearly the much more polished game of the two and everybody's better choice when looking for a tactical hero shooter to play, so Rogue Company was unfortunately overshadowed and overlooked pretty quickly. But that was just the beginning of all the problems that Rogue Company would have to end up dealing with over the long run, because following the game's release, things would just get progressively worse. And there's two things that the Rogue Company community can agree on when it comes to what caused most of the player base to walk away, and number one was the fact that the game was rampant with game-breaking bugs that the developers would sometimes take months in order to fix. And we're not talking about silly little bugs like, whoops, my skin didn't load properly this game, oh boy. No, it was more like, hey guys, I can't defuse the bomb, we can't play the game properly, please help. And with every single update that came out, it just felt like more and more bugs would just keep showing up, to the point where the players would eventually just get fed up with all the bugs and just start walking away. And number two was the fact that Rogue Company went through a sort of identity crisis throughout its lifespan, because Hi Rez really just could not figure out what they wanted to do with the game. You see, the original idea of the game was to make it a blend between casual and competitive, so they wanted the high-stakes glory of an esports scene, and they tried to do that with the Rogue Company Championship Series, but they also wanted the game to be super casual friendly and accessible to literally anybody, so the game didn't have that much of a high skill ceiling in terms of like aim and precision, just like how CSGO and Valorant have. So when the game initially came out, Hi Rez started focusing on the competitive aspect and balancing the game around the weapons and the demolition game mode, which brought, a bunch of hardcore players into the scene. People were excited about playing competitive, but as time went on and Hi Rez noticed that the game just really could not compete with Valorant, and it just wasn't doing good in terms of concurrent player base like they originally thought, then they completely switched their game plan around and started focusing on throwing out balance updates to center around the more casual team deathmatch mode instead of demolition, and just leaving the competitive and the hardcore players behind to try to capture a more casual, bigger audience. So as a result of all of this, the community ended up being fragmented to the point where the developers even had to implement forced crossplay into the game to help keep the lobbies from emptying up, which made the game even more geared towards the casual players because now you had mouse and keyboard players queuing up against Nintendo Switch players, so competitive integrity was literally just thrown out the window. And the balance updates in Rogue Company were also a complete mess because there was a constant jump between nerfs and buffs that was just hard, honestly, for the community to keep track of. The guns and the rogue abilities in the game used to be balanced around the fact that each rogue was just locked to their specific set of guns, so the way you balance the characters is that you had a rogue with an okay ability and just give him good guns, or you had a rogue that had a good ability and just give him like okay guns, and that's how you maintain balance. But then they decided to get rid of that feature, which now meant that you had OP rogues running around with OP weapons, and just balancing overall was just thrown out the window as well. So the community was just being tossed back and forth like a ragdoll with all these updates, and there was no sense of game loyalty left, because the players were never really given a reason to stick around with all these chaotic updates that were going on. And if you decided to take a few months away from Rogue Company to go play something else, there have been so many updates, and most of them probably poorly planned, I'm sure, that now Rogue Company was a completely different game. This is the Hi Rez curse. They come out with a banger of a video game and they form a solid community. They don't know how to manage the game and start throwing out random updates left and right, trying to figure out what to do with the game. The player base eventually leaves because nobody feels like they're being listened to, and then Hi Rez ultimately just abandons the game to keep working on Paladins and Smite. And to make matters even worse for Rogue Company, Hi Rez went through a massive company restructuring a while back that kind of just killed off a lot of people's hopes for the game being able to make a comeback ever, because at the time, Hi Rez was managing 4 different studios, which would end up being consolidated into 2. So you had Redbeard Games, which was in charge of managing Divine Knockout, and that one got merged with Titan Forge Games, which was in charge of Smite. So Divine Knockout essentially just went into maintenance mode to pour all of its resources into Smite. And First Watch Games, which was in charge of managing Rogue Company, got merged with Evil Mojo, which was in charge of running Paladins. So Rogue Company slowed down development dramatically so that they could focus working on Paladins instead. And now as a result of all that chaos, you have a pseudo-abandoned game that gets updates every so often, but you know, essentially it's not really dead, but it's kind of just like limping around waiting to be put out of its misery. And if you take a look at the Reddit page, you can see that there's like an endless amount of posts of people just talking about how dead the game is, but despite all of that, Rogue Company in the present day actually has a better community than most of the dead games that are out there. You know, it's a small community, but it is still there. And obviously the numbers in the Steam chart aren't doing too well for Rogue Company, but you have to keep in mind that the game is also available on the Epic Games launcher, it's on Xbox and on PlayStation, which don't really give you information of how many players are in the game, but you know, just the fact that there's so many people still talking about it, even if it's just to talk about how much they missed the game, well, it's a sign that there's still a little bit of a heartbeat left. However, the Nintendo Switch version did shut down a while ago, so yeah, we don't really count that one. But you know, for a game that people have been saying for over 2 years now that's just bound to die at any moment, Rogue Company has surprisingly still kept on limping. Like, it's not running, it's not doing good by any means, but it is still limping on. So yeah, that's all I really want to talk about with you guys today, so thank you guys for watching, and I'll catch you on the next one.